anyone can decide or determine whether a particular social conversation has the likelihood of turning into a crisis or not, just by looking at it, especially if it's within hours of it first appearing. We use this metaphor of soap bubbles. So if you think of each soap bubble as a single social conversation, some social conversations turn into crises. So most of them, I would say 99% of them, become nothing. They just burst, right? So the key to understanding or monitoring how this works is we generate a hot list so that at any moment in time, you can have a full picture of what are some of these conversations that could potentially become a crisis. And the key is to watch each of these conversations as they happen until they become big. And then that's when we know, all right, this is something that we need to pay attention to and be engaged. And then the rest of it, you just ignore, you don't do anything. We look deep into the entire environment and context of the client's operations. And then we look at what's potentially the risk scenarios, what could trigger crisis situations for them. And then we'll do the stakeholder mapping where we look internally into who are the people that have to be trained in how to manage a crisis, who are the people affected, who are the people that need to have input and consult into the process. And then externally, we use the Beacon tool to map out external influencers. This is a tool that we've developed in-house that allows us to aggregate social listing data from multiple providers. But the most important part of this, or relevant part of this to crisis management, is we have the predictive analytics, which allows us to analyze sentiment in real time and detect when sentiment turns negative or there's a shift in sentiment so that we can alert clients in real time. So this is the part of the tool that allows a brand as early as possible to know when a crisis potentially could happen. Back in the old days, it used to be just around analyzing keywords, right? So you would associate certain words with negative sentiments. You would associate certain words with positive sentiments. Now, we all know that doesn't work. What we do nowadays is we use natural language processing. We use artificial intelligence based on machine learning. We look at a conversation and we analyze on a sentence by sentence or phrase by phrase basis to look at the overall score of that conversation. Whether that's 0.8 negative or 0.9 negative. And so you kind of look at the numbers and you check the rate at which it changes. The sooner you catch a crisis happening, the more control you have over the situation and the greater possibility you have of actually heading off or mitigating a crisis. On average, it takes 21 hours before companies are able to issue meaningful issue-related communications, which in these days, things are measured in minutes. All this is saying is you need to be much more nimble nowadays if you want to head off crises. And if we analyze a lot of the crises that have happened that have an impact on reputation, the bulk of them snowballed because management was slow to respond. You can only be nimble if you know what to do, if you have been trained. And the only way to train someone in how to manage a crisis is to actually put them through one, right? And so that's where SONAR comes in. And typically in a war room, it's kind of a setup like this room where we have multiple screens. And on each of those screens, we have kind of your window into the world, right? And on that window is where you see the crisis unfolding. And so typically what we would have is we would have one screen that's social media. We would have one screen that's mainstream media. We can simulate any news media. Obviously, we've done BBC, CNN, Bloomberg, all of them. You need to see a real-time reaction to what you do in response to the outside world. And effectively, they are the outside world reacting to you. We actually also have a live component to it, which clients find very useful. We've had one case where we trained a food and beverage company where it was a mother and her baby was poisoned by something in one of the restaurants. And we actually had the very distraught mother talking on the telephone to the CEO of the company, crying and saying, oh, she's so afraid for the life of her baby daughter. So that's where the offline component comes in. We've also had cases where we had demonstrators banging on the door, demanding to talk to a director, We've also had cases where there are people like a reporter that just barge in and want to do an interview on the spot. So all of that adds to the intensity of the crisis, and we deliberately make it as realistic as possible so that once they've gone through this trial by fire, when a crisis actually happens, they know what to do. People frequently forget every new case is happening for the first time to that customer. And so although the company itself may have experienced the same situation 100 times, for the person that it just happened to, it is the first time.
Yeah.
And so they expect to be treated with respect and not be a number. You know what I mean? And a lot of companies forget that as well. And so we have to constantly drill that into them and say, don't act all tired and blasé and resigned to it. You have to respect the individual. It's all about understanding emotions. And in order to be an effective communicator, you have to understand that you're communicating to people. One advice I would give is, regardless of what industry or sector you're in, you should always be monitoring social conversations. So do not allocate less than 20% of your overall budget to it. Any company that's spending less than that, they are asking for trouble. A lot of people would say social media is not good for society and all that. I'm not going to go there. It is what it is, and you have to play with the beast.